So Nat asked an interesting question that in all these years I've never really dealt with, and that is what to do about the parts of this that are really personal to me. And I can tell you this, thousands and thousands of people are doing these workshops in China, and I just never really thought much about how they're doing it. And I knew Frank was doing, Frank's done 130 workshops, but as he pointed out in our telecon, he's never done publics like I have. He's done mostly NASA and aerospace groups. So that's his home territory also. So I think the answer to this is that there are certain pieces in here which I think really are very personal to me and have a lot, it's hard to tell in the third person. I think the Hubble failure discovery, I think you'll hear later about 100% commitment to find Junko, that kind of thing. So I think the answer to this is that as people want these, let me know and we'll record them and you can show them in the workshop just like video clips. So you can bring me into the workshop that way and just make it simple for everybody. So I'm happy to do that. So let me know if there's something you want done. I'll ask you to probably get on with me and be a little audience during it, but these are easy to make. And I think like discovering the Challenger failure might be another one where it's hard to tell it in the third person. That there's a very moving piece in here about processing the Hubble mirror flaw that I think, again, it'd be better to record me doing it. I just want to take us on we're not going to have much of a review. We don't have time with an hour for too much, but just to show you the structure of what we're doing. And this is a very structured workshop. It's kind of like the mathematics where you study arithmetic and then algebra and then trigonometry, then calculus, then advanced differential equations. It's kind of like that. So the first thing we've done is some foundational work about agreements. Everybody's doing a great job showing up on time. And I have about half a dozen agreements. And then a piece that's kind of, I think, foundational, but a little bit difficult because it's so much just talking. This idea of social context, which is core. The idea of social context is a fifth force, and it must be managed, and it can be managed. I think is a really core idea in all this. And only know of one other entity that even thinks about this ever. And so it's kind of unique to this work. And then the idea of mindsets. And mindsets or attitude is another word for it. I don't like the word attitude because it has negative connotations too. So I use the synonym mindset. These are central to everything. And so if we can establish mindsets, we can do a whole lot. And so the process here throughout is one of analysis. That's how physics works. You take a complex thing and you analyze, means just a fancy word for simplify. So we simplified into things you can understand and manage. We simplify mindset into emotions and thoughts, I'm going to call storylines, and show how we can manage our mindsets with this. And these are our springboards for action. That's a little summary of our path, and I'm going to sort of skip ahead because we're in the emotions section now, and we made a little progress. The idea that emotions are body sensations that the mind interprets and names as emotions, the fact that the same emotions are showing up everywhere, and we like feeling emotions to energize us, and the levels of energization are different for different emotions. And finally, the idea of emotional intelligence. I actually got onto this back when I was at CU with a book by Dan Goldman about this. And later an article in the Harvard Business Review that said that the most outstanding leaders in business organizations using objective criteria such as profitability were emotional intelligence, which was kind of a surprise at first. The article goes on to say emotional intelligence was twice as important as technical IQ and jobs at every level. So I've shown that here in a little graphic. And emotional intelligence was increasingly important at the highest levels. So why would this be? I can tell you that as you advance in the organization to higher and higher levels, your technical expertise becomes less important and your capacity to deal with people's emotions becomes more important because you spend more and more of your time dealing with people. When I was running the astrophysics division, my calendar would be full 8 hours a day with meetings if I let it. That's the nature of this. So think about this: which is more important for a happy marriage, EQ or IQ, or actually any relationship? So speaking of marriage, his wife said, if I were to die and you were to remarry, would you give your new wife my clothes? And you can see the Joker up here. I'm playing with you. You can see that in the picture. He said, that's silly. I never thought about anything like that. That's a crazy thought. A few minutes later, she says, if I were to die and you were to remarry, would you give your new wife my jewelry? He said, no, I never thought about anything like this. Where do you get this from? And she said, if I were to die and you were to remarry, would you give your new wife my car? No, she can't drive a stick shift. So I've got two examples of empathy. I think if you only had two things in the world, you would have empathy and accountability. And I've got a business example here from Microsoft, and talks about empathy being a business essential. It's about meeting unmet and unarticulated needs of customers.
But when I think about empathy or compassion, I think it's a business essential. We are in the business of basically meeting unmet, unarticulated needs of customers. And there's no way you're going to be able to get that consistently right if you don't have that deep sense of empathy or being able to see what others are seeing.
So I use that example for more business technical people. And with trainers, I use this example from Brene Brown. The professions where empathy is relevant came up with 4 qualities: the ability to take the perspective of another person, staying out of judgment, not easy to do when you enjoy it as much as most of us do, recognizing emotion in other people, and then communicating it.
Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people.
So we're going to go through each of the emotion groups. Glad group, what would it be like to live in the habitual mindset of happiness? And I'm going to show you, you can manage this by managing your thoughts, using interplay between emotions and thoughts. And remember, I talked about how we like to feel energized. This is a very energizing emotion. That's why we would like it. You should learn to do it. Spread it with jokes and fun things. Habituate expressing glad in your personal bureaucracy. We are creatures of habits, folks. If you make these habits, they're there forever. And use glad it motivates others to grant your requests. So you'll see this in action when you get a telemarketing call, and the first thing they do is ask you, how are you feeling? And the reason they're doing that is they want you to say, feeling good, which is what people normally respond. Then you're not going to want to break the mood. So you're going to want to give them what they want. That's what's going on here. We're going to look at this in more detail, how this works. And glad energizes everyone. If I think about the one characteristic of the most successful senior business executives, they're typically happy people. No matter what's going on in the organization, they project a smile and a sense of humor. It's powerful stuff. This really interested me when I came across this article. There are 2 very different glad group emotions that U.S. industries have conflated to try and sell us crap. Pleasure and happiness. To make us smoke, to get lung cancer, eat junk food, and now opiates. One opiate is too many, 1,000 is not enough. So I made this little table, and the difference between pleasure and happiness. The neurotransmitter of pleasure is dopamine. The neurotransmitter of happiness is serotonin. The duration of dopamine is short, serotonin is long. Does it downregulate? That's a technical word that means, do you need more and more of it? Dopamine, yes. Happiness, no, except by dopamine. The action that supports pleasure is taking. The action that supports happiness is giving. The substance work for pleasure, yes. Happiness, no. Addiction, yes, all extremes. This is everything from not just smoking and gambling and alcohol. It's also social media are designed for this. So this is a nice little piece. The things that create happiness are not for sale. However, they're available to every person on the planet. The first is connect. The first 4 C's, connect personally. When you look at somebody, the reason we have face-to-face meetings, for example, with heads of state meeting each other, is this personal connection creates empathy and energizes what are called mirror neurons.
In fact, all of the things that say, this feels good, I don't want or need anymore, are things that you can't buy. They're not for sale. They are, however, accessible to every single human being on the planet. They're all the things your mother told you, but you forgot. I call them the 4 C's. First one, connect. So interpersonal connection turns out to be extraordinarily important for happiness. And the reason is because face-to-face, eye-to-eye connection generates something called empathy. Empathy activates a specific set of neurons in your brain which have been termed mirror neurons, so that the feelings of the person you're talking to ultimately become adopted by you as well. And in that process, you generate contentment. So interpersonal connection is extraordinarily important.
Next is contribute. And the way I try and do this is with making the 4D system materials free to all and doing workshops and whatnot. Anyone that wants can use these tools in your workplace and make it a better place, contribute that way. Cope, sleeping, mindfulness, noticing your experience, exercise. The workshop has all these ingredients. Asians take naps during the breaks. We're going to look at a very specific form of mindfulness called 100% commitment. And every 30 minutes, we're going to get up and move. And finally, real food. Fish particularly has the building blocks of tryptophan and omega-3 neural membranes that build the building blocks for happiness. Serotonin.
Lastly, the 4th C, cook for yourself. When you go out to a fast food restaurant, you don't know what you're eating. It turns out there are 3 items in your diet that matter in terms of the serotonin dopamine connection. The first one, tryptophan. Tryptophan is the amino acid that is the building block to make serotonin. Happens to be the rarest amino acid in our diet. It's mostly found in fish and flax. We don't eat a lot of fish. In general, it's probably low on our list, in part because of shipping processes, farmed fish versus wild fish, etc. But the bottom line is, fish have a very high level of tryptophan. Omega-3 fatty acids, those are found also in fish, and they are found in certain foodstuffs that are grown, mostly algae. Things that eat algae ultimately increase your omega-3s. So fish eat algae, we eat the fish. Why are omega-3s important? Because they provide stability to neuronal membranes, so it's less likely that neurons will die. And they can be compressed easier. They allow for neurons to come back to shape so that you don't kill off the neurons that ultimately drive happiness. And then lastly, the negative one, fructose, sugar, the one that actually drives dopamine up, also drives serotonin down. So, high tryptophan, high omega-3 fatty acids, low fructose. That's called real food.
MAD is a very, very powerful emotion, uniquely powerful and energizing if you use it correctly. males use it to cover up weaker emotions, typically scared. This is the dynamic of the blamer state that we'll look at in the drama section in more detail. But anger, particularly for males, helps us repress feelings we don't want to feel, like scared. It's very useful, anger at situations instead of people. I'm going to show you 4 video clips that are very powerful in the way people are influenced. And you'll see the pattern in all of them is it's a combination of mad group feelings with love group feelings. When you pair these up, it's the most powerful motivator, I think, possible. So what do you do when someone rages at you? You can try raging back, and that will only energize them more, I guarantee you. So the other option is to become a human lightning rod. So when I was up in the front office of NASA, I worked with the NASA administrator who had a personality a lot like Donald Trump's, in that he would spontaneously rage at people. So I sat next to him. He and I had a friendship of sorts from when he was in industry. Probably, I may have been his only friend, I don't know, but he didn't have many. And I decided that I was going to protect NASA from his crazy stuff. So I'd come in there and sit down next to him. Meeting would start, and he would start to ramble on with some crazy idea. Well, I didn't even tell you what they were, but they were things that technically, he's a very smart guy, but technically these things were nonsensical. So what nobody knew is before the meeting started, I would sit down, I would ground my feet to the floor. I'd become a human lightning rod, and I'm quietly belly breathing, and no one can see I'm doing this. I'm just sitting there passively. So when he said something like that, I'd say something like, you know, Dan, that's a really bad idea. And I would wait. Lightning bolts would come. Then about 10 seconds later, he'd say, Charlie, you're absolutely right. Nothing endeared me to the NASA workforce more than the capacity to be able to do this. I did this for about 8 months, then I left. I couldn't do this forever. And I'll tell you this, after one of those occasions, I would have to go and walk around the local park for a few minutes and get the excess charge out. But this gained more respect for me from the other senior managers than anything I ever did. Finally, anger is deadly. You will not be punished for your anger, you'll be punished by your anger. Sad group. Sad can be a very good thing. For example, melancholy. It's a chance to soberly reflect on life's choices, and it stimulates creativity. Van Gogh did all of these great paintings like Starry Night when he was at the mental institution in Arles. And Einstein's 2 great contributions were both published in 1905. The photoelectric effect, which got him a Nobel Prize, and the idea of special relativity, which changed physics forever. And in that time, he was rejected by the major universities. He couldn't get a job as a professor, even though his parents were academics, so they had no use for him. He worked in the patent office and did this research work at night. So this melancholy, he's never done anything as creative in the rest of his life as that 1 year in depression. Think about how we respond to sad emotion. It's the only one we want to go comfort people with. And it's very useful to mourn losses. So during the middle of the Hubble failure, my Hubble scientist came to see me and he said, Charlie, something's going on here. The astronomy community is ripping themselves apart. Every day they're sending worse and worse hate emails to each other. You got to do something. And I said, okay, I've thought about it. And there was a meeting of the American Astronomical Society coming up. So I called the head of the society, so I'd like to speak to the group. And they said, sure, but as you know, it's a research conference and all the slots are taken. If I took away a slot from a researcher to give you the time, it would upset people. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up a room in the hotel and put up posters, you're coming, and you can speak at 6:30 in the evening. There's nothing scheduled, but that's the kind of time people normally go eat dinner. And I don't know how many people are going to come to see you, I don't want to embarrass you, so we're going to set up a room where we can make a small room and the hotel staff can expand it as more people come. I said, that works fine for me. So the first time I've got to think about this is I'm on the train riding from Washington to Philadelphia. And I said, what's going on here? I said, what this is about losses and the fact that these people don't know how to move through losses. They've got to mourn the losses. So I walked into the room and walked up to the podium. And when I came in there, the room was filling up. By the time I came about 15 minutes early, by the time it was time to start the talk, we had 800 astronomers in there. All the seats were filled. The people were standing in the aisles and standing in the back. So I said, this is about losses. For me, it's about the loss of my personal reputation, the loss of my agency's reputation, my team who worked on this for 10 years under my supervision, and actually our national reputation. The whole world watched Hubble launch, and we had lots of international partners. And for you, any of you that are on soft money, and probably a lot of people in this room are, because we had a gigantic Hubble's grants program, you're probably out of work. And I see lots of young people in here. They're probably planning to get NASA grants and get PhDs writing theses about Hubble data. The grants aren't going to be there because the telescope doesn't work and there's no data to be shared. So let's just all collectively put our head down and be still for a few minutes and feel the enormity of our losses. Well, the room started filling up with crying astronomers. So I stood up there and let this go on for, it felt like a very long time. It was probably 2 or 3 minutes. And I said, now go home and complete the mourning process, however you have to do it. And now I'm going to tell you about my commitment to find a way to fix the telescope. So I went back home late that night on the train back to Washington. A couple of days later, my chief scientist walks in and says, I don't know what you did, but it's all settled down. There's no more rancor. It's all stopped. I said, I just taught him how to use mourning sadness to move through losses. And the kind of thing I really like is when I get an email after a workshop, a lady sent me one and said, you know, I realized my children and I had never mourned the fact that their father deserted us. And we have held this enmity toward him and carried this on our shoulders for years now. So I gathered everybody on Saturday and said, let's finally look at what really happened here and let's mourn this loss. And we're finally free of this. So very powerful stuff. Scared group emotions. Rational fear is very useful. I make a little side study out of how irrational human fear is. It interests me that there's almost no connection between what we're afraid of and what's really dangerous. And scared group, just like mad with love, can mobilize. And one of my favorite stories about this is I had a space project. It's called X-ray Timing Explorer. And I had contacted through my staff, the science team, and said, look, if we don't reduce the cost, the project's going to be canceled. And Hale Bratt, who was the chief scientist, MIT guy, sent me an email about this years later. And I did not even remember this event because doing this with projects was not unusual. Trying to save them from the continued overruns was kind of an ordinary part of my life. But he said, what you didn't know is I gathered all the scientists before we met with you, and we agreed that we're absolutely not going to give in to you. We're not going to descope anything. And when we met with you in person, you changed us all on the spot. And the reason was we got that you cared. And so this is where the warning about an impending calamity worked because they thought it was coming from a place of caring about them. And was quite credible because my own scientific background is high energy astrophysics. And this is the kind of mission that I would have liked. So combining scared with caring is really a very, very powerful thing. Scared with mad can immobilize. You energize this so-called HPA axis. This is why I'm not picked for jury duty anymore, because when they ask me questions about eyewitness testimony, I say I believe it's nonsense because the HPA axis is energized. When people are scared, they don't see reality. So I get dismissed. And what's interesting to me is there are two states of fear. The sympathetic, I don't know why it's named for this, one of you might. Anyway, it's the fight or flight state, and the parasympathetic. And you can choose to move out of the sympathetic state of fear, which is a place of enormous anxiety, discomfort, into the parasympathetic by simply controlling your breathing. And I'm going to talk more about how to do that later. And we like the energy of scared when it's safe. That's why people like roller coaster rides and horror movies. We like being scared when it's safe to be scared. Why? It's energizing, and we like to feel energized. So some years ago, I went to see a physical fitness expert, and she said, "I want to know what your goals are." I said, "I don't have any goals." She said, "You don't have any goals?" I said, "I've never had any goals." So I thought this might be weird, so I called my good friend Frank Martin, who many of you know. I said, "Frank, you ever had any goals?" I never had any goals either. So I said, "I'll tell you one goal I don't have, which is to stay alive as long as possible. If I can't read an article or watch a YouTube video and understand it, I'm ready to check out. I don't want to be around." She said, "You got to read Atul Gawande's book, Being Mortal." So I sometimes tell people I read the book, but that's not the truth. What I've learned to do, instead of reading books like this, I go to YouTube and I type in Atul Gawande, Being Mortal, and I get a 1 hour presentation that tells me everything I need to know about a 600-page book. If it's done at a university, particularly, I'm encouraged to do this. And what he said was that he was a surgical oncologist, and all he knew to do was to operate on people. So if someone came to see him, he'd do the surgery, and a very high percentage of the time, people died on the operating table. Another high percentage would be quadriplegics. And he said he never was taught in medical school how to do anything except to do the surgery, and never learned how to talk with people. Nobody knew how to do this.
Whatever it is, people have goals and priorities besides just living longer. The way we can learn what those goals and priorities are is a highly technical procedure. We ask them, but we don't ask. In medicine, we don't ask. Less than a third of the time do we ask people what their goals and priorities are if their health worsens. When we do, however, that group of people end up with less suffering because they tend to stop their aggressive therapy sooner. They have less days in the hospital or in the nursing home. They're less likely to die in an institution. They're more likely to go on hospice towards the end of life. And the irony is they live longer. Lung cancer patients in a randomized trial lived 25% longer, 1/3 lower costs. And that just means we're making bad decisions as we come to the end. The most important ways that these folks who are good at it do it is by asking certain basic questions that allow you to tune the care appropriately. And those few questions are, what's your understanding of where you are with your health or your condition? Prognosis is very hard as a subject, but people will often tell you exactly what they're experiencing. What are your goals and priorities if time becomes short? What are your fears and worries for the future? What are you willing to sacrifice and what are you not willing to sacrifice? Based on those, we don't ask them in our nursing homes, we don't ask them in our medical world. We have treated it as if doing so might be a death panel. But I think that's changing remarkably. I think we're finally accepting that we can ask these questions and then demand that our answers are honored, our wishes are respected.
So I put this slide up about this because you're probably going to have to confront this at some time with a relative or a friend or even yourself. And here's the questions. Do you understand your illness? What are your fears for the future? What's important for you if time is short? What are you willing and unwilling to go through for more time? And what would a good day look like? So there's an example in the book where he asks the guy these questions, and the guy answers the last one saying, if I could eat chocolate ice cream and watch football on television, that'd be enough. And the guy's son spoke up and said, you don't like to watch football. He said, don't tell me what I like and don't like. So Atul said, okay, we'll do the surgery. And he did, and the guy was a quadriplegic. And he asked him, what about this? He said, you did exactly what I want, I'm fine. Turns out with 2 years of therapy, he recovered mobility. So file this away someplace, you might need these someday. Interesting thing, How to Live Forever. Lex Friedman, who's a Drexel grad, same school I went to, PhD in artificial intelligence. The guy talked about, Max Tegmark, another physicist, talked about Richard Feynman influencing him to study physics. And the story was one where someone said to Feynman, you can't enjoy a roaring fire in the same way I can because you look at the physics of it. He said, no, you're wrong. I see the art in the fire, but it's even more beautiful for me to understand the electrons changing shells and emitting and everything else. So the thought was, he asked Max if he feared death. He said, no, it's the natural order of things. And he said, reminiscing about Feynman keeps him alive in our minds. And it struck me that that's more important than our physical body. If you make contributions where you stay alive that way. And so I've got friends with mutual friends that have died, and we talk about them and about how they're still alive. They're still alive in our minds. So that's how you can live forever, live a life of purpose and contribution. So now on your feet, let's move. Any way you want, get up. 30 minutes of listening, more than anyone can take. I recommend the deep knee bends because it flexes the biggest muscles in your body. Keep breathing. Okay, so we're going to move on to love grouping motions. The fifth. I looked at definitions of this for a long time. It's defined in our society typically as what I think is more properly called lust. But this is my definition. Love is when another person's happiness and well-being is necessary for your happiness and well-being. And it's an antidote for the mental illness of narcissism, which is rampant in our society. So I think, again, there's some confusion. The first emotion of love, by the way, I picked up the Greek names for these because physics uses a lot of Greek symbols. I'm comfortable with them. Eros, which is, and by the way, that's a picture of one of the Greek islands on a cruise that I took some years ago. Eros is love. It's selfish love, seeking sex, status, power. And once again, it confuses pleasure, dopamine, with happiness of serotonin. I don't know of an affair that I can think of that has ever worked out well. The next is philos, partners in love with habitual appreciation, addressing shared interests. This is how I live with my wife. We're happy together, and I pay attention to appreciating her and pay attention to our shared interests, which I'll talk more about later. And finally, agape, transcendent love, and that's what I try and bring into my workshops, addressing deep human needs with gratitude and appreciation. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So back when I was teaching undergraduate and graduate classes at CU, I noticed something really interesting. When my students asked each other, how do you feel? The answer was, fine, I'm really busy. This struck me as odd. Why is busyness a good thing? And sometimes they'd walk up to me and say, Professor, I hope you're really busy. So I thought about this. In other societies, how do they deal with it? In Japan, the inquiry is, oh, genki desu ka? How's your life energy? And the answer is genki desu. My life energy is good, which seems to me a much more appropriate response. I spent a lot of time in China, and historically, the answer in China was, fine, I ate today. This was during the Cultural Revolution. More modern China, fine, my stocks are up. I was traveling in Ireland at the time that I was doing this work, and they said, fine, the weather is good, when it wasn't. So why is being busy a good thing? Is it an addiction? Addiction is continued use of a mood-altering behavior with life-damaging consequences. Is it because if we're not busy, we let fear and anxiety, which is a subset of fear, emotions we don't want to feel, then if you want to repress your emotions, the experience of them, one way to do this is simply by being busy all the time. You have to slow down to experience emotions. But we're using busyness to mitigate anxiety. I think it's interesting how close the term busyness is to business. Here's a few things that I use to slow down. Before you answer the phone, this used to be more common. Take 2 deep breaths. Close your eyes for the conversation. Nobody will suspect you did it except through a deeper sense of feeling heard. And we're going to talk about the yellow needs, and the big one being inclusion. And feeling heard is a huge need. Just try having a conversation with your spouse where they don't feel heard. Do this experiment, see how that works. And set pauses. So one of my clients suggested this. They have a moment of silence at the start of every meeting. I thought that's a good idea. Cleanse out everything, clear your mind for the next one. Junko and I pause before we eat with the Japanese itadakimasu. Take a few seconds just to slow down and think about it. Many people tell me this is very, very powerful. That when you find yourself feeling angry or frustrated, which is a nice word for angry, because you're waiting in the doctor's office or you're stuck in traffic. That's a picture of the 405 in Los Angeles. It looks like that 24 hours a day. Shift your thought to naming this as found time and enjoy it. This is our methodology for managing our state of being. We're going to look at in more detail, managing what you think, your storylines. So when I was at NASA, if I let it, my secretary would fill my calendar every minute of the day. And I knew I needed time by myself. In fact, I tell people any business executive should have at least 20% of unscheduled time. And so in Japan, for example, if you're by yourself and someone opens the door and sees you're by yourself, they'll excuse themselves. In Japan, people sit in ma, which is a state of kind of a relaxed consciousness. And they respect that. In the US, they don't. If you're by yourself, they think you're doing nothing useful. If they think you're in a meeting with someone, they won't interrupt you. So I told my secretary to schedule 20% of my calendar with meetings with me, and don't ever tell anybody that's who I was meeting with. This was time I could think, I could walk down the hall, talk to someone I wanted to talk to, and I think very effective. One of my clients got this, and they negotiated every Wednesday morning as quiet time for their team. For 3 hours, they would do no social activities, no phone calls, no meetings. And I said, what did you call that time of day? They called it doing real work. Okay. And the benefit of this is that if you do this, when you have that time back in the meeting, you're going to be focused on the meeting, not focusing on the work you have to do that you can't get done. So I tell everybody with all this material, experiment with it. It works for me, it works for lots of people, but see how it works for you. So just try this. Commit to doing nothing for 10 minutes. And if you're worried about wasting time, set a timer so you won't take 11 minutes. And notice what happens. And you're probably going to feel the emotion of anxiety. And the way you're going to find it is the fact that it manifests most typically in your chest. And so you'll feel a sensation there now with our somatic psychology method. I'm feeling anxious, just bring your attention to it. And you want to mitigate these emotions. And the way to do that is to breathe into them. So on your feet, stand up. Everybody, put your hands on your stomach. And the muscle of breathing is the diaphragm. Shoulders have nothing to do with it. So what you want to do is push your diaphragm down and have air coming in. It's possible to do it backward, but it's not what you want. Let the air just flow in. Some people, the pranayama techniques, have air in the mouth or out the nose. I don't do that. I just breathe. I can feel the relaxation already setting in. So I live about 5,800 feet above sea level, and the air is thin. So to breathe up here, you need a really big belly. Okay. That's our primary strategy for dealing with troublesome emotions. Now, I used to travel a lot. In 2019, we were out of the country 8 times. I was in China twice, Japan, South America, Antarctica, Germany twice, Spain, Siberia. That's a lot of jet lag. So I frequently wake up, especially on the China trips, I'd wake up the first night in the hotel and I'm wide awake and I look at the clock and it's 2 a.m. So what I do is just do the belly breathing. I just sit there and you can count. I sometimes count, sometimes not. Just do this. And what this does, it activates the parasympathetic response. When I talked about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic response, we're back to managing our state of being. What happens when I do this is it feels like nothing's different. I'm just breathing and it doesn't feel like I'm sleeping or anything, but I open my eyes and it's 4. I close my eyes, go back to breathing. It just feels like I'm awake breathing, open my eyes, it's 6. 6, I can get up, go to breakfast, go to work. So summarize this like Kermit the Frog, you want to practice belly breathing. And you want to live it, you want to check for you manage your emotions by slowing down, feeling and breathing into them, and then check for your thoughts, your storylines in play. So express the emotion situations require. For GLAD group, start meetings with jokes, make requests. Use GLAD to get people to give you what you want when you make a request. I don't know anything more powerful than having a sense of humor about difficulties. Mad at situations and add caring to motivate. Remain centered and calm to drain the belly breathing, be a human lightning rod. Sad, embrace sad to move through losses. Melancholy to slow down and create. Think back to Van Gogh and Einstein. Scared, bring attention to impending calamities. If you add caring, it'll work. And love, make appreciation a habit. So appreciation is a business word for love. Speak of loving your work, embrace empathy. Emotions are like children. You don't want them driving the car, but you don't want to stuff them in the trunk either. Let's do a card check, a thumbs up. Anybody got questions or move on? Good? Okay. So now we're going to make thoughts work for us also with this idea of storylines. This is cognitive psychology simplified. I first got on, people ask me, how did you get onto this thing? I went to some talks with a friend of mine by Albert Ellis, who's a kind of a wacko psychotherapist with a thing called rational emotive behavioral therapy. I'm going to simplify this into storylines we're going to color. Green storylines, green thoughts, support behaviors that take you to outcomes. I'm forever a behaviorist. If you don't change behavior, you're doing nothing useful. Red storylines create behaviors that take you away from your outcomes, most typically into drama states of victim and blamer, and we're going to explore that in more detail also. You ever thought about the power of thoughts and words? In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. From the Roman Empire, our life is what our thoughts make it. The world is what we think it is. If we change our thoughts, we change the world. This is from the Toltec culture. That's the old capital of Tula. That's again a photograph I took. One of my hobbies is failed civilizations. And this is another one. The word is the most beautiful tool you have as a human. It's a tool of magic. So we're going to look at the definition of truth that's probably going to be unusual for you. We're going to look at how storylines can destroy industries or bring them to success or companies. We're going to look at storylines nations run and how powerful they are. I can tell you a lot about the national storylines by how people drive. Trust me, people drive very differently in China and Germany. What's interesting is a special class of storylines about people's motivations that we commonly run. I'm going to show you they're wrong 95% of the time. What do you do about that? You don't let yourself run those. And finally, storylines can have false limits. I'm going to use an example from ranches because we have a lot of them in Colorado that can limit you in ways that are completely unnecessary. And remember, we're going to choose to focus on you changing you. That was one of our core agreements. So, story is the telling of a happening, true or fictitious, with the intent of informing or persuading, most often persuading. I'm going to define truth as that which is unarguable. The storylines are our self-talk, and this runs in our brain, most of us, much of the time. Thoughts and expressions that seem true to us, but are not the truth because they're arguable. So let's go over this. This is important. Truth is that which is unarguable. Storylines are our self-talk and things that we then repeat to others that seem true to us, but are not the truth because they're arguable. So the surest unarguable truth is the truth of your experience. So there's a big difference between saying, I heard you say this, versus you said this. I heard you say is unarguable. You said is arguable. If you say you said, you'll argue about it. I heard, a rational person won't argue. Really simple example, I feel hot in this room is unarguable. This room is hot is very arguable. And we're going to talk about the mindset of gratitude and how you make appreciation authentic. If you live in gratitude, when you express appreciation, it's the truth of your experience and it's experienced as authentic and unarguable. So one exception, spouses. I'm hungry. No, you're not. Are you guilty of homophily? What do you think? Usually workshops get very quiet when I ask this question. And the reason is they think it has something to do with homosexuality. It doesn't. Homophily is our preference to relate with people who share our storylines. That defines our tribalism, our groups we hang out with, our religious experiences, and politics. When we hear storylines we agree with, a small voice says that's the truth. And from this point on in the workshop, when I'm dialoguing about processing the situation and someone says something, I'll often joke back and say, that's the truth. Or if it's something that I don't agree with, I'll say, that's just your storyline. And we want to argue about storylines that are different from ours. This is basically how groupthink occurs with this process. So here's your outcomes that you want. I'm going to define green storylines as storylines that support behaviors that bring you to your outcomes. Red storylines support behaviors that take you away from your outcomes and get stuck in S. Everybody know what S is? Usually the workshop goes very quiet. S is situation. What did you think? This? So storylines drive industries to success or ruin. A U.S. industry ran this storyline. Improving quality means higher cost until a single foreign competitor, I gave it away a little bit, you probably knew who it was. A single foreign competitor took 70% market share. So what behavior does that storyline support? Well, you build low quality products, right? Another storyline, so a consultant named W. Edward Deming was ignored in the US much as I am, but he was revered in Japan the same way I'm revered in China. And he went to a tiny town in Japan no one had ever heard of, the city of Toyota, and he taught them this storyline: improving quality is the best way to lower cost. What behavior does that storyline support? You manufacture high quality products. And of course, you know the story about Toyota, largest manufacturer in the world. So religion storylines are very powerful. This is from Mark Twain. Man is a religious animal. He's the only religious animal. He's the only animal that has the true religion, several of them, in fact. He's the only animal that loves his neighbor as himself and cuts his throat if his theology isn't straight. He's made a graveyard of the globe in trying his honest best to smooth his brother's path to happiness in heaven. So running religion storylines can make good people better and may make bad people worse. Think about the terrorists. So can I talk about some religion storylines with you? The storyline's about Jesus. A burglar breaks into your house and he hears Jesus is watching you. He sees a parrot in the corner. He walks up and asks, "Are you talking to me?" The parrot says, "Yes, my name is Ronald." The burglar laughs and says, what kind of stupid idiot gives a parrot a stupid name like that? The parrot laughs and says, the same idiot who names his pit bull Jesus. So heaven and hell. Heaven is the Japanese wife, British police, Chinese cook, an American house, that's the house that burned down, by the way, and a German car. Hell is a Japanese house, a British cook, a Chinese salary, Indian trains, and German police. So national storylines. In the US, we have a storyline today. We can each choose our own reality. Ignore peer-reviewed science. Climate change is a Chinese hoax. You probably heard that. In China, the storyline is too many people, and trust me, if you go there, you'll get that. This is from them. And practicality overrides rules. This is not an accident. This is typical Beijing traffic, where people are driving however they want to get where they're going. By the way, they're the best drivers on earth. I could never drive in this traffic. Japan, as you know, I've spent a lot of time there, and they tell me their dominant storyline is we have a population of 125 million, and there's not much arable land. We can only lead 40. So this leads to karoshi, death by overwork, and the colonialism of the early in the last century, taking resources away from other people that led to ultimately World War II in the Pacific. In France, they run the storyline, we have the best food and language. So the behavior is we're entitled to lots of vacations and huge pensions. In Germany, you succeed through discipline and effort. Behaviors obey the rules and work hard. Is it easy to see how these two countries have been at war most of the time? In North Korea, it's dear leader and fear of attack, isolation, underdevelopment. So this is an interesting piece about storylines and motivations. So a client called me, it was TRW at the time, and said, our customer is threatening to cancel a contract. The details are that they just want a contract for a giant Earth satellite system. And you got to come out here right away, we're in trouble. So I got on a plane, flew out to Los Angeles, no big deal. I said, what's going on? And Bruce, my client, said our competitor got to them again. Every time we win, after it's over, they go back to the customer and convince them that our plan was not a good one. Sam said he's never liked our company. By the way, I knew the customer. He was the center director of Goddard. So that's one reason they had me come out. He's never liked our company. And Mary said he's getting orders from above. The administrator's mad at us, so he's telling them to cancel a contract. So I said, I've worked with each of you for some years, and Bruce, you always see that competitor behind every tree. And Sam, you frequently complain that people don't like the company. And Mary, you also complain about upper management. So what's going on here? This is projection or mirror image thinking. Each of them is projecting their own stuff on the scene. And so the way this works is under stress, we project so much of ourselves that what we see is ourselves. We don't see the reality. We see things not as they are, but as we are. Again, this author Tomlinson. So imagine you're that consultant. What would you do now? Would you pick one of the three storylines and run with it? Because they would have very different actions, what you would do. What I simply did is, did anybody ask him why he did this? And Sam spoke up and said, I did. He said he wanted the flexibility to accommodate future budget cuts. What's interesting is that when I asked Sam for his storyline, because of the projection phenomenon, he didn't offer this. And I said, well, I know the guy, and he thinks the Earth science budget is going to be cut. And he watched what happened after Challenger with all the overruns. So what he's thinking is probably that if he has a bunch of small satellites, he can accommodate budget uncertainties much easier, because he can just simply not start a new satellite instead of continuing this big thing, but just to delay and rescope. So can we tell a good story about how we can accommodate this? They said yes, and I helped them put the pitch together, and they called me after meeting with the customer and said, I'm so happy with how you're managing things, I'm going to give you more work. So a guy named Robert Cooper does this work for a living. He says your storylines about other people's motivations are wrong 95% of the time. So if you want to see this in action, go turn the news on or read any newspaper about, for example, the two political parties, about what's motivating the other one. It's all nonsense. It's all storylines about motivations. How do you use this insight? You simply don't let yourself run motivation storylines. So in my company, when it was active, everyone had to evidence the 4D work every day. And I'd hear someone starting to run a storyline about, probably about our sponsor in NASA, because they were difficult to work with, about their motivations. And I'd say, do you hear what you're doing? Oh yeah. I said, well, stop. Okay. So when you hear someone, when you hear somebody running a red storyline, this is an exception to I'm not changing other people rule. Is it useful to try and argue them out of it? What do you think? No, because storylines are arguable by definition, and blue personalities love to argue, and pigs love to get you down in a slop with them. So don't do that. How about inquire what the consequences would be if we ran that storyline? I think that works, but mindset, again, is critical here. If you telegraph curiosity with that question, it'll work. If it sounds like you're criticizing, it won't. Offer a replacement storyline. I say, just like when people say to me, Charlie, I've got some feedback for Larissa, should I give it to her? I'd say, ask her if she wants it. If she doesn't want it, don't waste both of your time. And if she does, go ahead and do it. So we're at 9:59. We're almost through with this. Do you want to run over a few minutes and finish this section? Everybody? Yes? Thumbs up? 3 or 4
Tanya's actually got to jump.
Well, let's stop here and we'll pick up with this slide on next week.
Awesome.
Thank you all. Next week, we'll open up with, I'm keeping my agreements. We stop on time. Next week, we'll open up with me closing this out and then getting any questions on today's material.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Charlie, 30 seconds after everybody's gone.
Yep. You want me to stop recording?
Yes, please.